Hi everyone, welcome back to Rated MA. I'm Allie and I'm here alone again today because Critical Role cannot stop doing the damn thing where they put a shit ton of spoiler stuff into the episodes that I watch with my best friend who hasn't seen the campaign. So, what I am here to do today is simply to talk about those spoiler things that I could not talk about before. Here's kind of how I want to do this. I am not confident in my abilities to do this well because for full transparency, I just played a 7 to 8 hour D&D game. I'm pretty wiped, but I have to get this recorded for you guys because everyone requested that I do this, and it just kind of makes sense for me to do so. So, I have made a document that I am reading off of right here in front of me that has the episodes broken down into important things that need to be talked about per episode. Then at the end of this, I do want to sit down and talk a little bit about future things that I think could be coming up in the Mighty Nein, whether it's future seasons or the last two episodes. So I do want to talk about all of that. And then also just the future of Critical Role animation as well. I am going to do my best not to be all over the place, but it is 2 o'clock in the morning and I am quite tired, so please bear with me, guys. I did a very small amount of research in the time that I had to put together this list, so I may still get things wrong or I may misremember things. Please bear with me. Give me a little bit of grace. I've got so much lore in my brain, and I'm also very focused on my own campaign that I just DM'd for 7 or 8 hours. Let's begin with episode 4, which is called The Mighty Nein. This is our first kind of dungeon crawl esque episode where it's our big come together moment. We've had the first 3 episodes, which set up kind of not necessarily the origin stories, but set up the beginnings of these dynamics and these group relationships. Episode 4 is where we take all of those pieces and put them together. So let's first begin at the carnival. So the carnival aftermath sees the Mighty Nein in prison. That is where we begin. It was one of the very first teasers that we ever got for the Mighty Nein. Not the first, that would have been the Jester and Ford art of them in Nicodranus in episode 2, but it was probably the second or third thing that we actually saw. It was the first teaser trailer that we saw, which featured all of them being questioned about the incident at the circus. Here's why this is important. Number one, in the campaign, Yasha was a part of the carnival. Yasha and Molly worked together. Yasha kind of ran like security at the carnival. I don't remember exactly if she had any specific role, but she hung out with Molly at the carnival. And one of the things that happened at the end of the very first episode was that Yasha fled and went out and was gone for a few episodes because Ashley was filming Blind Spot. So, because Yasha is not here and is not a part of the carnival in any sort of way, it leaves Molly to bear the brunt of the responsibility for the carnival. Molly mostly did that anyway in the campaign, but it is a little bit different here because there literally is no one else who can shoulder it but Molly. Especially with Gustav being dead, which is a massive departure from the campaign because Gustav does not die in the campaign. There also is the idea that the group did not go on house arrest. That was something that happened in the campaign where after they were questioned, they all went back to, was it the Nestled Nook? They all went back to the inn or the tavern that they were staying at in the city. Caleb, I think, was the only one. Caleb and Not, I think, were the only two that were allowed to leave, but Ford, Bo, Jester, and Molly were told to stay in the house. And if I remember correctly, if this is the same moment that I'm thinking it was, they all did try to sneak out and they snuck out successfully, but they got caught on the way back in. And there was a whole thing where they were in an alleyway and they were pretending to look for shoes. It was a whole thing. None of that happened, obviously. So instead, they just go out to the swamp and fight the devil toad. One of the other massive departures in this episode that needs to be talked about is Caleb's amulet. The amulet is called the Amulet of Proof Against Detection and Location. I lovingly refer to it as the anti-scry amulet. Basically, what it does is it protects you from divination magic and very specifically protects you from scry. In the campaign, Caleb stole this off of a guard after he escaped from Vergessen Sanatorium, which is where he spent 11 years after killing his mother and father in the fire, which we'll talk about when we get to episode 5. Don't you worry. But Caleb, on his way out of Vergessen, killed a guard, stole that amulet, and has been wearing it for the last 5 years. In the show, it is taken from him by the guards, which I found fascinating given how important that amulet is. In the campaign, Caleb's amulet is kind of more of a, it's just kind of a thing that he has. It doesn't really have any effect in the campaign as much, more so than it just stops Matt from scrying on him. So nothing ever happens with it. It's just something that he wears, but it's an attunement that he has to keep on. And it's not really until, at least as far as I can remember, it's really not until they get to the dynasty that that amulet becomes important. Because as we find out, not only is Essex scrying on them, but other members of the dynasty are scrying on them, and members of the empire are scrying on them as well. There's very famously a moment when they're in the Jor house, which is the house that Essek and his family gift them after they become the heroes of the dynasty in Rosona, where they are in the house and Ford, using the Star Razor, which is his weapon at the time, casting see invisibility, is able to see one of the scrying orbs that is following someone in the party around. And Caleb is basically able to dispel it very quickly by being within the vicinity of whoever was being scryed on. Because it like kind of auto cancels it. So his amulet does become very important, and I did find it fascinating that they just kind of took it away from him. I do think though that by removing the amulet, it gives them an excuse to go see Pumat. Although they are kind of doing this whole thing where the gentleman was supposed to give them the amulet. Maybe he sends them to Pumat. That would make sense because they're both in Zadash. We'll talk about the gentleman and stuff when we get to episode 6. Don't worry. Up next on my list that I wanted to talk about, I want to talk a little bit about consecution. I mentioned consecution pretty heavily in my first breakdown video, so if you're unsure of what consecution is, you can either look it up yourself or you can go back and watch my other breakdown where I talk about it. So I'm not going to talk about it fully in here, but there is a very heavy emphasis on consecution in the show. I find that very interesting considering that there wasn't that same emphasis in the campaign. Although we found out much later on, and by later on, I mean not even in the campaign. We found this out after the campaign in like a Talks Machina or something after the fact, that Essek was not consecuted. When the Mighty Nein originally ask him if he is, he lies and says that he is, and he's not. So everything that they learn about consecution, they learn from Essek, who is not consecuted, has not gone through the consecution process. But what we see here in this episode is we see him telling Trent about it. Someone left a comment where they were basically saying that Dwendal is really interested in preserving his life, and so theoretically could be Trent, since Trent is a human. So it is very interesting. I do think that this is where they're taking it. They're putting a heavy emphasis on consecution because it is one of the most powerful things that the beacon can do. I think it would be very interesting if they took it that route of the fact that Trent and maybe Dwendal, by comparison, are both trying to find as much information out as they can about consecution. So when Essek in episode 4 tells Trent about consecution, he tells him also about the anamnesis process, although it is not named as anamnesis, but that is just what I remember Matt calling it in the campaign, which is the process of the memories returning back to the soul after some amount of time. It could be a reach, but within that scene, when Essek is talking about the anamnesis process specifically, there is a glimpse on screen of a boy and a girl who are talking or playing, and she sees him through all the different lives that either he's led or she's led. In one of those lives, he turns into what looks like a half orc that kind of looks like Hallandil Fang from Campaign 4, which is Liam's character from Campaign 4. Kind of down to like the exact same doublet that he's wearing. He's wearing like an orange and yellow doublet. He's got his little fangs. The moment that I saw it, I was like, holy shit, that's fucking Hallandil Fang. I know people don't think that's him. Some people think that it could be Oscar from Tusk Love. Whoever you want it to be. I personally can see the comparison between Hallandil Fang and this character that we saw in episode 4. I just thought that was kind of cool. There's also an interesting thing that's brought up with Trent and Essek regarding consecution, which is that Essek and Trent experiment and hypothesize that they can force a soul to reincarnate by guiding it within the beacon. So normally, from what I understand through consecution, after you go through the process of it, when you die within the radius of the beacon, which in the campaign is 100 miles, so pretty big distance. Once you die within the radius of the beacon, your soul will find its way to the beacon. However, Trent and Essek experiment with the idea that if you kill someone and as their soul is escaping, if you can guide it into the beacon, you can force them to go through that process without actually having to be consecuted. I think this is interesting because, again, I think this sets up the idea that Trent or maybe even Dwendal are attempting to find a reincarnation substitute, for lack of a better term. I will be curious to see what everyone else thinks about that. I think that is kind of the prevailing theory, is that this is what they're going for, because reincarnation, very much like the Bright Queen, would be the ultimate way to keep power. Up next, I want to talk about Ford very briefly. We saw him get more heavy into the warlock stuff, so we saw him use Mask of Many Faces to escape from the jail, and we also saw him summon his packed weapon, which is the Sword of Fathoms, which was originally Vandrin's. There is also, I mentioned this in our actual reaction, but I do think it's very fun. There's a quick kind of mechanic that happens where when they're trying to break out of the prison, Ford uses Eldritch Blast, and then Jester uses her spiritual weapon. Both of those do force damage, and force damage is very good against structures and objects. But yeah, that's why they are able to break out so easy. Next, I want to talk about Essek, and I want to very specifically talk about Essek being manipulated by Trent. I've seen a lot of conversation about Essek online, and I've seen a lot of people talking about how they are kind of disgruntled that it seems almost as if they've rewritten Essek as a character. When the Mighty Nein meet Essek in episode 57, which I think is called In Love and War, Essek is a little cold. He doesn't know them, which is very fair. And there is a sort of aloofness about him that he maintains for a while until he begins to care for the Mighty Nein. People that I have seen online have been commenting that Essek seems almost too kind or too warm. And I think that this is good, actually, that he's not, because I think that leaves a lot of room for him to adjust and change. I think the one thing that I would tell people who are having a bit of hesitancy with how Essek is being done is remember, a character is always supposed to change. Every single character is supposed to go through a change, and this is Essek's change. I actually think that for his full story arc, it makes more sense if we see him with a softer side first, then we see him be hardened and a bit more evil, and we see how he fell. Then we see him revert back to that of like, don't forget you were a good person at one point. Mind you, Essek is still not a good person. Regardless of whether or not he pushed back against Trent's experiments, he still sat there and watched him kill those people and experiment on them. Essek is not a good person. He's just a bit naive. And I mentioned this in one of our reactions, but it's also important to note that Essek is young for his race. He is only around 120 years old. And for a drow who can live 7 to 800 years old, I mean, he's basically in his like early to mid 20s. I think his naivete shows through because, like Caleb eventually was, he is manipulated by Trent. And Trent is very, very good at manipulating people. And I think people need to give Essek a little bit of leeway in that regard. And so Essek, in this conversation with Trent, is asked about his mother. And it comes from a place of concern, or seemingly comes from a place of concern, of Trent being like, by the way, what's your mother's illness? Which is very obvious to the rest of us that he's fishing for information. But again, like I said, Essek is naive. And Essek, I think more specifically, is looking for a kindred spirit. And I like that they're setting him up because there was something in the campaign about Caleb being afraid that he was turning into Trent or feeling as though he was too similar to Trent. Smash cut to this show where Caleb and Essek fall in love. And I think there is a moment where Essek is looking for a partner, not a romantic partner, of course, but looking for some sort of partnership with Trent that he later finds in Caleb. It's showing the parallels between Caleb and Trent very heavily. And I actually think that that works for his storyline. I know not everyone's going to love it. It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. But for me personally, I think in terms of how the Essek and Caleb dynamic works, I think this is a good move. I'm just going to say that. Up next, we had a brief moment between Knot and Jester in which we get a further hint about Knot's curse, which is that she can't really stand the sight of her own appearance. We saw a brief hint at this in episode 1, in which she saw her reflection in the fish tank when they were in the pet shop trying to get the ingredients to bring back Frumpkin. But there's a moment here where she sees her reflection in like a wine bottle, and it makes her almost wince. And then Not really struggles with accepting Jester's compliments when Jester is like, "You're so beautiful," and Not's like, "No, I'm not." Again, these are further hints at a grander story, which is the story of how Veth Bernardo became Not the Brave. We also, very interesting, I really like this, we have signs of Jester's faith being kind of shaken a little bit. It's never broken because Jester would never lose faith in the Traveler, but there is moments where she begins to question the Traveler. I think that's really important, especially because we're not seeing him. Although I have seen the comments that people have been leaving about having theories that the Traveler is always there, whether it's him at the carnival or if he's on the road or if he's an NPC. I do think that is totally fair and that could totally happen. I myself have not caught any Traveler lookalikes in the background, although mayhaps once the season's over, I'll go back and do a big rewatch and see if I can find any. But my main theory still stands that we won't see the Traveler until the finale of this season, until the last episode when like Jester's by herself and the Traveler appears to her. And the rest of the nine don't see it. And I don't think either. I don't think that the audience will see like Artagan in his true form. I actually think we'll just see a hooded individual who like rests a hand on her shoulder or something, let's say. But in this episode, episode 4, it is very interesting that she begins telling everybody like, "Oh, the Traveler's real." And they're like, "Yeah, sure. He's totally real." And I think it begins to get to her a little bit, and I think that's fun. A crisis of faith with a religious person in a D&D campaign is always fun. Then, in the same kind of setting and location, we also had Caleb and Ford having a very interesting conversation about the Soltris Academy. The Soltris Academy in the campaign is both in Rexentrum and in Zadash. I don't know if the show is retconning that to just have it be in Zadash or not. I've seen some people leave some comments saying that. Could very well be. I don't know. I just always assumed it was still in Rexentrum because that's where it was in the campaign, but I could be wrong. Totally fine. Regardless, we get this mention from Ford of the Soltris Academy because, as far as Ford knows, it is a school of arcana and a school where he could theoretically learn how his magic works. In the campaign, I want to say Caleb dissuades him from it because Ford's magic is different in that his magic is gifted versus Caleb's magic is learned. I want to say that that's what happens, but I don't actually remember too fully how that conversation goes. But this type of conversation between Ford and Caleb does actually happen in the campaign, which I was very excited to see because it's one of my favorite early Caleb and Ford moments. And then there's also this moment with Caleb too, where when Bo tells everyone that she's a monk of the Cobalt Soul, he kind of gives this like expose reading about it. And to me, that always stuck out as very interesting because Caleb has a photographic memory, he has an eidetic memory, and that means that he remembers a lot of stuff. And because his memory is so good, it made sense to me that he had read about the Cobalt Soul before. Well, smash cut to episode 5, and we find out that not only did he learn about the Cobalt Soul, he infiltrated the Cobalt Soul and stole some stuff from them. So that would be where he gets that information from. So I like that that kind of tied back in and gave it a reason of like, why does he know all this shit? Oh, because he fucked them up like 20 years ago. That's why. We also saw Molly in this episode use a bit more of his blood hunter abilities while he's able to taste a bit of blood and find the direct route that the devil toad took when it escaped from the circus. And we got a quote that I love, which is "Lead on, circus man," which I believe was said in the campaign. Don't remember when, don't remember who said it, but I swear to God, I've heard that before in the campaign. Pretty sure. Also, Molly, is important to note, was known as the Ice Spinner, and he is the Order of the Ghost Slayer. That is his blood hunter order that he is. And because Molly is called the Ice Spinner, it makes perfect sense that when he uses, later on in the episode, he uses his Crimson Right, it's ice damage, because that is the ability that he has. Back to Essek very briefly, we did also see him kind of learn about the depth of his mistake in giving Trent the beacon, but also in teaching Trent a bit of dunamancy. There is this really interesting thing that Meg and I talked about when we watched episode 4 of, well, why does Essek just not leave? Well, because Trent knows he's a traitor. Essek is kind of forced to work with Trent at this point. There really is no other choice for him. Because should he take the beacon and leave, there is absolutely nothing that stops Trent from turning around and telling the Bright Queen Essek Thalos is the traitor. It would be very hard for him to cover it up. Like, he basically has no choice but to stay and continue seeing this through. And I think it's in this moment in episode 4 where he's like, oh shit, what have I done? And then in the fight in the swamp, there was a lot of things that I want to talk about, but they'll be pretty brief. So we had not focusing on helping Toya. This is another hint at her past. This is about Yeza and Luke. Yeza, her husband, Luke, her son. And another thing I found interesting, it removed Jester and Not from that combat, which is not something that would typically happen in a campaign, especially because Not is a heavy damage dealer because she's a rogue, but also because Jester is a healer, and it would make more sense for Jester to be in a fight than out of it. However, narratively, it does make sense that Not would take the child and go because Not is the only mother and parent in the group. And Jester coming out to help her also does make sense because Toya was worse off than the rest of the party was. Although the team up of Bo, Ford, Molly, and Caleb low-key kind of eats. I kind of need to see more of that. That is a good team. Caleb, squishy as hell, but Ford, Bo, and Molly, that's a good team up with a glass cannon wizard at the back. Not too shabby. We also saw Bo get her bow staff. She will later get a staff that I believe is called the Belaborer. I think is what her staff is called, but she doesn't get that for a while. Molly uses Crimson Right. I just mentioned that. We also got Pop Pop. Loved it. One of my favorite moments. We also heard Molly call Caleb Magic Man. I think he calls him Magic Man in the campaign, but very specifically in the campaign also, when Molly is updating his tarot cards, he makes the magician Caleb. Love is Yasha. The magician is Caleb. Joy is Jester. Oh boy, forgive me, guys. I don't remember what the others are, but I know that that's what those three are very specifically. So it kind of further hints at Molly's tarot cards, which are really fun. Also, there was a big departure in how the fight concluded. So in the fight, Toya was actually a part of the fight, and she was influencing the Devil Toad in the campaign, I should say. And Bo actually knocked her out and then taunted the Devil Toad with Toya's body. Also in the campaign, Ford was the one that killed the Devil Toad, which was kind of just a order of operations type thing of like he was next up in combat, he did enough damage, yada yada. It's Molly's circus. Molly has to wrap up this story. Narratively, it makes absolute sense. We also had a hint at a little rift to another plane of existence. This was very, very, very interesting to me. Caleb brought up a good point of like, well, if the Devil Toad didn't create this, then who did? Molly explains that it is a portal to another plane. There are multiple planes within the worlds. This one was likely to the Hells, which is where the Devil Toad originated from. There's the Hells of Desphath, which we know from Legend of Vox Machina. There's the astral sea, there's the elemental plane of fire and air and water and all those. There's a bunch of different planes. The Nine also traveled to a couple different planes, including the fire plane, the plane of elemental plane of fire, where Luke, Nott's son, is killed. Marion got pretty fucked up in that fight too, but very sadly, Luke died like full dead in that fight. But they also went to the astral sea at one point when they were going to the city of Flash at the end of the campaign. Oh my god, that is going to look so cool animated, but it's going to be so gross. Molly says in this scene too that he has a memory of the rift but does not remember it, and that is because the memory is Lucian's. I will talk about Lucian when we get to episode 6, so don't worry. And if I'm not mistaken, Lucian would know about the rifts to the other planes, which are memories that he got from the Somnovum when he read the book that they found in Aor. And then wrapping up episode 4 with all the stuff I could think of, which admittedly maybe not is not everything, but I'm doing my best. We also had Bo and Caleb have a discussion that they did have in the campaign as well, which is Bo says to him something about like, have you ever been to a Cobalt Soul library? And Caleb says, no, you'll have to take me sometime. And that ends up being a deal that they do actually make. And they do actually go to the Cobalt Soul together and study and read and learn a bunch of shit. Nice little inclusion here, and I do actually think we will see them go to a Cobalt Soul library. Potentially by the end of the season, maybe? It depends on where they're at when they finish up the season. Considering the last episode is called the Zadash Job, and there is a Cobalt Soul archive in Zadash, could happen in the last episode. I think that'd be really fun. We also saw a very evil flashback of the night Caleb burned his house down. We'll talk about that in the next episode. Molly said to the group, I always say to leave a place better than I found it. This ends up being a massive thesis statement for the Mighty Nein. It is something that they think about constantly. It is words that often make them think of Molly Mock. When Molly does die, these words will come back to haunt the Mighty Nein a lot, and especially when they refined Lucian. And then the last thing that I want to talk about in regards to like the aftermath of the fight was that Molly shows Jester his tarot card, which is, I'm sorry, people have been correcting me saying it's an oracle deck. I don't know that much about tarot. I have a tarot deck myself, but I don't know anything about an oracle deck. So if it's an oracle deck, my bad. His deck specifically has a card though that is Home and the Traveler, which is real. I actually own Molly's tarot deck, oracle deck, whatever. I actually own it, and that is a real card. It genuinely is Home and the Traveler. So I thought that was really fun. Now let's talk about episode 5, Little Spark. This episode hurt me badly. I cried for like 10 minutes after this episode was over. Then I stopped crying, and then when I started to do notes, I started crying again. So there's that. Let's begin in Blumenthal, which is Caleb's home village. We see him as a young boy, probably. Actually, we don't have a confirmed age for him. I know that Caleb has an Origins comic, which, believe it or not, I actually haven't read. Shocking, I know. I don't know how old he was, but I want to say he's like 15, like 15 or 16, I think is how old he is. But we are introduced to him as Bren Bren Aldrich Ermendrude is his name. His mother Una and his father Leofric or Leofric. Liam says it both ways, and I don't speak German, so I will defer to my German speakers. And Frumpkin the cat, which was devious and evil and cruel of them, but what else do I expect at this fucking point? And we see them in their very humble home life in their kind of cottage in Blumenthal, out in the Zemni fields of the Dwendalian Empire. We see that Bren, a young Bren, has a knack for transmutation magic. I have been talking about transmutation magic for a while on this channel because Caleb, even though logistically speaking, it would make more sense for him to be an evocation specialist, which would be the ability to evoke spells, like a lot of his fire spells are evocation. His heart actually lies with transmutation, and that is the process of changing one material to another. So, in this, I want to say it's like rope or twine or some sort of fabric that he transmutates into metal to hold the fence together. When Trent arrives and talks about it, there is the same thing that Essek likely saw, which is the kind elderly gentleman who means no harm, who could hurt no fly, who is just here to find a pupil to take to the Solstice Academy. And unfortunately, Caleb and his family fall for the guys. They're none the wiser. And honestly, they have no reason to not suspect, or they have no reason to suspect Trent because why would he lie? This is a Cerberus Assembly mage. This is a professor at Soltris. Like, why would he want to hurt your poor 15-year-old son? Well, he's a fucking freak, that's why. As Bren is leaving, he also meets Astrid Beck and Eadwulf Grieve, his future romantic partners, who Trent also picked up for their arcane potential. I believe they're all from Blumenthal, though I don't remember. I don't remember if in the campaign they knew each other before Trent found them all. Because if Blumenthal is so small, I would think that they would have known each other, especially if they all possessed arcane potential, excuse me. So someone correct me. I don't actually know. Like I said, I haven't read Caleb's origin story, so I don't actually know how they all came to meet, whether it was this way in which they met via Trent or if they all knew each other before Trent found them. We cut back to the present day, mid fight with Owelia, the Volstrucker, who found them at the end of episode 4. Bo has subdued her and he shoots her with a firebolt at point blank range, basically. Kicks her and is trying to get his amulet back, which she destroys. What an interesting plot point that was. I was not expecting that. Again, like I talked about a little bit earlier when I talked about episode 4, I think this is setting up Caleb being able to get it from Pumat potentially, because Pumat is in Zadash. Although it does seem, as of right now, having seen episode 6, it does seem as though perhaps the gentleman will get it for him. But again, Pumat is a contractor, so Pumat is contracted by other people because we know that Pumat works for the Cerberus Assembly. I totally think that in episode 7 or in, I guess it would be episode 7, I don't know why it would be episode 8, but in episode 7, the gentleman could straight up just tell them like, okay, go to Pumat, tell him that the gentleman sent you, give him this sheet of paper or something, and he'll give you the amulet. I don't know. Could happen like that. Put it on my tab. I'm not sure. I totally think that could happen. I totally think we're going to see Pumat in season 1. I think it would be a loss to not see Pumat in season 1. We also got confirmation that Owelia and Caleb did in fact know each other. This is a slight departure from the campaign in which Owelia was a recent graduate of Trent's when we met her in the campaign, and I don't know if they ever spoke to her. She is a very minor role in the campaign. So forgive me if they do speak to her. I don't remember. I know that she's there and present, and I know that she's obviously like a named figure, but I don't remember if Caleb knew her or not. But in this, I mean, they were straight up classmates. Like they went to school together, and Caleb was a bit of a shit, and she was jealous of him and jealous of his, whether it was his arcane talents or just the fact that Trent obviously favored him. I'm not 100% sure. It probably is a little bit of both, to be completely honest with you. But it does give them a very interesting dynamic of explaining why he was so paranoid when he saw her at the circus. It was because he did recognize her. We also had later on, this is later on the episode, I'm jumping around a little bit. Apologies, doing my best. When Knot is talking with Ford, she begins giving Jester and Ford and Molly instructions on how to cure Ford's poisoned condition that he's in because he gets hit with Owelia's magic. When Knot is telling them all, Ford asks what a goblin assistant to a wizard would know about poison, and she says that she knew an alchemist. This, of course, is Yeza Bernardo, her husband, who is an alchemist, who not yet, but will eventually be picked up by Essek Thalis and taken to the dynasty and put in the Dungeon of Penance, which is the super evil, spooky dungeon in the dynasty. Also, something that happened too was that Not heard Ford's real voice as he slipped back into his actual accent during his kind of feverish induced state. This is something that happened a couple of times in the campaign, not just to Not, happened to Jester, happened to Caleb, like the whole party heard it at points. But it was always quick enough that Ford was able to wave it away. Although they were suspicious about it, no one ever really pushed him on it. But the party did hear him use various accents throughout the campaign, and very specifically overnight when Ford would wake up from nightmares, they did hear him do the British accent, which is his natural accent. We also saw the horrendous torture scene, both of Aurelia and of Caleb, in which we saw that Trent was placing residuum crystals under the skin of the Volstrucker to enhance their arcane potential. Caleb has removed his have since been removed, so his scars do not light up the same way that Aurelia's or Astrid's and Aedwulf's do. We know residuum grows in Whitestone very specifically. I think this is such a fun callback to campaign 1 and a callback to Vox Machina. It also is the beginning of the relationship between what the fans refer to as the Blumen Trio, which is the relationship between Astrid Aedwulf and Caleb Bren at the time, in which the three of them were in a polyamorous relationship that was both platonic, romantic, and sexual, really. I think they were in love with each other. I think that's fair to say, and they were all together, all three of them, but it was a, I don't want to call it toxic. It probably was toxic, but it's more of like a broken relationship in which I remember in the campaign, Liam described it as, you know, they were the only thing the other had. And there was instances where Trent would basically send them to a tower somewhere and they would be locked together and they had to huddle for warmth. And that was how their relationship built, was through things like that. And so their closeness was almost manufactured in a way. It is a very interesting thing in the campaign because every time they meet up with Astrid and Aedwulf, they are working for Trent, but it's so obvious that they still love Caleb or Bren. It is so unbelievably obvious that they still love him and that he still bears some love for them, even if it is different now than it once was. And obviously, Caleb ends up with Essek, but there is a part of him, I think, that will always love Astrid and Aedwulf because of what they went through together, which I think is totally fair. A lot of people trauma bond. We also had a really interesting scene with Molly and Jester, in which Molly kind of encourages Jester to think on her own. I originally said that I wasn't sure if Molly actually had a lot of religious iconography with him. I knew that his kind of coat that he travels with was decorated in symbols and such, but I thought I remembered Molly having a thing with the Moonweaver. But I've been seeing the comments people have left that he had stuff from the Platinum Dragon as well, and so it kind of was more he kind of dipped his toes in a lot of different things, or he just didn't commit to a single religion, which is very Molly, not surprising at all. So that being said, I think it's really interesting to have Molly as this kind of antithesis to what Jester is, which Jester is a cleric who is built on her religious faith and her deity, versus Molly, who's kind of just like, gods do what they want to do. And I also think it was funny they threw in this little line where Molly's like, I find the past boring. Well, Molly Mock, that's because you woke up at a grave 2 years ago in the Savalier Wood. That's because you don't have a past to remember. Moving along, I only have a couple more notes for this episode, for episode 5. Astrid and Bren, we get to see this scene of them dancing together. This was something that Caleb mentioned in the campaign, was that Bren, Astrid, and Aedwulf used to go dancing. There was like a dance hall near them. And it eventually leads to a scene where he dances with Jester and he accidentally calls her Astrid. I believe he's drunk in that scene. But that is actually how the party learns about Astrid. It's the very first time they ever hear of her is when he calls Jester by Astrid's name. Because, as we know, Caleb falls in love with Jester and is very heavily in love with her for a while, but does not believe himself to be worthy of her. And it's not really until he meets Essek that he begins to let go of that. Caleb's feelings for Jester do begin to alter and change when he sees that she loves Ford, and he thinks that Ford or Bo would be a much better match for her. I'm hoping that we begin to see what is the beginnings of Widow Jest, which is Widowgast and Jester, because their dynamic is very interesting to me. His little blueberry. I love them. Let's talk about some of the major changes that this episode made. The biggest one, Trent does not appear to modify the memories of the three. This is something that happened in the campaign. I am a little surprised that they didn't do it here. I don't think it's a bad change necessarily. Let's get that out of the way. I don't think it's a bad change. It's definitely a change, though. In the campaign, when Caleb tells everyone what happened and when he describes how he killed his family, it was made very apparent that he found out later on that Trent had been modifying his memory, and very specifically had modified his memory, I want to say, to either overhear or learn something about his parents being traitors. So Caleb, when he killed his parents, fully believed that they were traitors. And it wasn't until he was in the sanatorium when he was in Vergessen that he was given the Greater Restoration spell by another inmate or another guard or someone in there who broke that charm on him, and he realized his parents were never traitors. The show does not appear to do that, which is interesting. It gives a lot more weight to what Caleb does, in that he kind of just made this choice on his own to do this. Yes, he was manipulated. Yes, he was a victim of abuse. Yes, all of those things are true. But he still goes out there and kills his family with hardly any remorse at first. It is not until he hears them screaming, realizes that he's killed Frumpkin, his mother, and his father, that he kind of comes to the conclusion of, like, what am I doing? What have I done? And it breaks him. This is a massive, massive, massive departure from the campaign. I am curious to see how this plays in later. I mean, it also changes the dynamic between Astrid and Eadwulf too, where there was the question in the campaign of, do they know? Do they know that it's all a falsehood? Do they know that their parents weren't actually traitors? Instead, now it just kind of leads into the idea of, like, yeah, we killed our parents, fuck it, and we still work for Trent. But also, this episode did not talk about the fact that Astrid and Eadwulf also killed their parents. It's just seemingly just Bren. So that's different. I'll be curious to see if they continue with that. I'm sure they will, because that was kind of like a major thing for the two of them, was that they also killed their parents, but it didn't break them the same way that it broke Bren. We also had a moment when Bren is killing, I should say Caleb, when Caleb is killing Owelia, she sends a note to Astrid. We, at the time, I assumed it was Trent, but we found out in episode 6 it was Astrid, who received a note that Bren had survived, that he was out and about in the world, and not only that, that he fucking killed her. We also had in this episode 2 more changes that need to be talked about, which is the He's My Boy speech, which is the speech that Not originally gives the party when they're, I don't remember where they are, but the party is basically questioning Not. I think it's after, I want to say it's after the scene where Caleb tries to steal a scroll and Ford stops him from it and holds a sword up to his neck and is basically like, I'll kill you if you don't drop it. And Not goes back to steal it for him. And I want to say it's after that. I could be wrong. Please forgive me. It is 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm very tired. I think it's after that. And they are all talking to Not. Caleb is not there. Caleb is not present for this conversation, but everyone else is. And they all kind of gang up on Not a little bit. And they're basically like, you don't have to do everything that he says. Like, you don't have to do all these things. You don't have to do this stuff for him that's dangerous, blah, blah, blah. Ford says something to Not about being like, I think he basically insinuates that Not needs Caleb in some way. Basically, what happens is Not turns around and says, I think there's been a misconception here. Caleb and I do have a relationship that is that of a parent and a child, except I am the parent and he is the child. And that is the crux of that conversation, is the idea that Not and Caleb take care of each other, but she protects him because he's her boy. Obviously, with the hindsight of having seen the campaign, we all know that this is because of Luke, and there is some sort of part of her that sees a bit of Caleb's energy as, I don't want to say childish, but childlike, I think is a better term for it, in that Caleb is an orphan. He has no family anymore. He has no friends. He's just, in the campaign, he just has a fey cat that he can summon at will. And he's kind of lost. He doesn't really have anything. And Not, also at the same time, is away from her family. And she is a mother in her heart. And she sees Caleb suffering. And there's a part of her that kind of imprints on him a little bit. And then later in the campaign as well, you find out too that she loved him a little bit, fell in love with him a little bit. They have a very interesting dynamic. But in the campaign, This conversation happens with everybody. Not tells everyone, he's my boy, I keep him safe. Where here in the show, it kind of seems like it's only to Bo. The other party members are in the room, so it could be alluded to that they overhear it, but the conversation felt private because it was just Bo and not having this talk. I don't know that I love it that way. I think I might have preferred it if it was to the whole group like it was before, but also at this point in the story, they've only been together for a handful of days at this point. So not having that conversation with them doesn't make as much sense as it did in the campaign where they'd been together for a few weeks at that point. Another major change, too, the last major change that I want to talk about for this episode, is the fact that Caleb tells the entire party about killing his family. In the campaign, he only tells Bo and not at first. He eventually reveals it to the rest of the Mighty Nein, but it is very early on. It's like the first 20-ish episodes, I think, maybe like 18 or 19, episode 18 or 19, I think, where he tells Bo and Not, I'm going to tell you the story of how I murdered my mother and father, and he tells them about everything. But even though the audience knew that information, the Mighty Nein did not. They did not know. They just knew that Caleb had some sort of fire-related trauma. So it is interesting that they brought it up here, but also I don't necessarily think that it's a bad call. Everyone saw what Caleb did in the forest. They knew that he had cast magic on them. He had a lot of explaining to do. And so he did. He explained himself. It is interesting, though. I don't know that everyone is going to love that change, but what can you do? All right. Last episode, episode 6. Let's get into it. Holy cow, there was a lot of stuff in this episode, so bear with me, guys. I'm going to have a lot to talk about here. First and foremost, we started with Yasha. This is the first time we've seen her since episode 1. I know people are mad about it. I totally get it. But this is not just Yasha. This is the Orphan Maker. I love the touch that vultures follow her. I don't remember if that was something in the campaign or not, but it's super cool. Super cool. Very cool visual, very terrifying. But we know that she is in the Empire looking for the assembly. I remember something about Oban needing souls, and so Yasha was looking for souls. I remember that whole thing. However, I don't know for what reason she would be looking for the assembly, and she's seemingly doing so on Oban's orders because Oban tells her to find something for him, but I don't know what she's looking for. It would be cool if she was looking for the Happy Fun Ball, but I don't know why the assembly would have the Happy Fun Ball. I'm sorry, the Archmage's Bane, the Heirloom Sphere, whatever. I know that that sounds crazy that that could be what she's looking for, but hear me out. You find out later on in the campaign the Happy Fun Ball, which is an interdimensional plane where it's basically like once you get sucked into it, it's like a series of maze-like rooms that all do different shit and will fuck you up. I know it seems crazy that I'm talking about the Happy Fun Ball. Here's what I'm thinking. This is why I'm thinking it, okay? So in the campaign, when they go into the Folding Halls of Halas, they find the Permaheart Chamber, which is where the heart of the Laughing Hand is. The Laughing Hand is some evil ass fucking creature that Oban uses who torments the party. The Laughing Hand is so scary, and I cannot wait to see him animated. The only thing I can think of that he'd be looking for with the assembly is if the assembly had the heirloom sphere, and he's looking for it because once you kill the heart of the Laughing Hand, he is mortal. But when his heart remains beating within the Permaheart Chamber, he cannot be killed. So if Oban theoretically was looking for the Happy Fun Ball and would hold onto it, it would give him assurance that the Laughing Hand could not be killed. That's the only thing I can think of. You guys let me know down below. What is Yasha looking for when it comes to the assembly? We also saw Oban and Zuala. I've mentioned Oban a lot. Oban is a fiendish entity who has his own machinations. I will talk about those in a bit when we get towards the end of the episode. And he is mind controlling Yasha. He fucking sucks. And also Zuala, who is Yasha's deceased wife. Yasha really had like a dead wife flashback. That's low-key kind of funny. But Zuala is Yasha's wife, who was killed by her tribe. Yasha was from, was it the Dolamar tribe? The something tribe? Yasha's from a tribe of, I think it's their tribe of Asamar is what I'm thinking. And from where they were in the wastes, basically in her tribe, they were, I want to say they were assigned a mate or assigned like a romantic partner, and Yasha chose Zuala instead of her assigned person. And because of that, they killed Zuala. And Very famously, I think in the campaign, Yasha never knew where she was killed, and she was always looking for like where she had died. And one thing about Yasha is she collects flowers, and we saw Zuala in a field of flowers because Zuala liked flowers, and Yasha has a book that she presses flowers into. And oh my god, it's one of the saddest moments in the campaign where she tells everyone about Zuala and talks about her book of flowers and says, I have so many flowers to show her.
I don't know if my heart could ever be healed, but I'm okay with that. I feel like if it were put back together, then that means Zuala would be gone. But I know one day I want to go back there, and I don't know where she was buried, but that's... I have so many flowers to bring to her.
Then, in this episode, we meet the gentleman. And we learn about the gentleman in the show from Molly. Molly says he learned about it from Gustav. But in the campaign, they learned about it from a halfling named Thed, who they rescued from a phase spider underneath Zadash. In exchange for saving his life, they basically were like, yeah, you can tell us about the gentleman. The gentleman was like a name that they had learned because Bo had been stealing someone's mail, and she had read the name the gentleman, but they didn't really have any context for it. I think they just knew he was in Zadash, and that was it. And so when they saved this little halfling guy, he was able to tell them, and he gave them, I believe he gave them the passcode, which is I don't have any money, but I do possess many gifts, or I bring many gifts, or something like that. And we found out that they are going to see the gentleman about that replacement amulet for Caleb, the amulet of proof against detection and location. Again, I totally think that this could set up the gentleman being like, yeah, just go get it from Pumat Soul. Here's money, here's what you'll need to buy it, and he'll either give them a shit ton of gold to go buy that amulet back, or he'll give them like a slip of paper or something that basically is like, hey, Pumat, it's the gentleman. Please give them everything that they need and put it on my tab. Something like that. That's kind of how the gentleman works, is he works in gifts and favors, obviously. Bo met back up with Dyron, and Dyron officially learned about Trent, got confirmation from Bo. And this is something that's really interesting. I haven't seen anyone else talk about this, but this was something that I remembered in the moment that I was able to read up on, which is basically that in the campaign, Dyron had a lot of prejudices because of things that she had experienced in her youth. Dyron really had strong opinions on the Empire and the dynasty. And it wasn't until she lived in the dynasty, specifically in the Jor house, because she pretended to be like their housekeeper or whatever for a while, when she was living there gathering intel on Essek, actually, she kind of learned how to unlearn those prejudices that she had. And it wasn't until I was mid episode that I was like, oh yeah, Dyron used to be like Loki a little racist. That was weird. I was proud of myself that I remembered that because it's such a small, inconsequential thing. But I always liked Dyron. I thought Dyron was cool. So jumping down to Astrid, we actually saw Astrid scrying on Caleb because he doesn't have his amulet. And I really liked the way that Scry was visualized as like an apparition of her, because Scry, like I said, becomes very important in this campaign. And she sees him in Zadash near the academy. I've seen some people leaving this comment because it was something that I said in episode 6, which was she in Rexentrum? Was she in Zadash? We weren't really 100% sure. People seem to think that they are kind of merging the two academies and just making Zadash where the academy was. I guess in one of the episodes, Trent said something about like prepare a sigil to Rexentrum, which would indicate that they were not in Rexentrum. I must have missed that. Totally fine. In my head, I remember that there was two, so that's my bad. So theoretically, she could have also been in Zadash. But another thing that's really interesting about that is she does not tell Wolf about it. She has the opportunity to tell him that she has found Bren, and she doesn't. I don't remember in the campaign if it's ever talked about or not, but Astrid and Eadwulf, their relationship, I think, fractures after Bren goes to Vergessen. I don't know that they stay together. I don't remember. Someone correct me. I do find it interesting, though, that she has the chance to tell Wolf and she does not. To me, that kind of indicates maybe she does not trust Eadwulf with Bren. Astrid, to me, has always read as she is still in love with Bren. I think he is like her one true love. I don't have any doubt in my mind that she still loved Wolf and does love Wolf, but I think the love she felt for Bren was a little bit different. I always got the sense that Astrid and Caleb were the couple, and Wolf was kind of on the outside. That could just be my experience from watching the campaign, though, because there was such a heavier emphasis on Astrid than there was on Aedwulf. That could just be me. I don't know. Like I said, I haven't read the origin story. Moving on. We saw the evening nip, which is where the gentleman does his business. I don't have much coin, but I do possess many gifts, or I bring many gifts. However, I think many gifts is the key phrase that you have to speak in order to be let downstairs. And we meet the gentleman, Babanon Dosal, also known as Jester's father. Babanon used to be, I think he used to be a sailor or something, and he ended up meeting Marion, and he did fall in love with her, but did not feel as though he was good enough for her and left. And I don't think he knew about Jester. I don't think he knew that he had a daughter. It's not until Jester figures it out that he realizes that she's his. But in the campaign, he pushes back heavy on that and like refuses to call her his daughter, refuses to accept his parentage. It's not until much later in the campaign that he finally begins to accept it. But yeah, we met the gentleman voiced by Nathan Fillion, which is very fun. I am curious to see how long they stay with the gentleman, how much they contact him, because he was pretty key for like a good 10 or 15 episodes, I think. But once they got into the dynasty stuff, they really did not interact with him much, apart from when Jester sent to him, really was all it was. After that, we moved into a brand new scene, which was Trent getting arrested for his involvement with the beacons. This is put together by Vestaragna, the Archmage of Archmage of Antiquities. Trent is the Archmage of Civil Influence, my mistake. And Ves gets him arrested with Curator Tasha. I believe Curator Tasha is named after the head show writer, Tasha Hugh. This is an interesting scene. I don't really know what to make of it because the divide between Ves and Trent was there in the campaign. I remember it being there in the campaign, but I don't remember why it was there in the campaign. So maybe this is an excuse for it. Or it could also just be that Trent's not really a good person. To be fair, Ves is not a great person either. We'll get to that in my next point. This sets up a really, really interesting dynamic between the two of them where she knows that he stole the beacon. He knows that she knows that he stole the beacon. But I don't know how they move forward from this because Trent's not going to kill her because we know who kills Vestaragna. We'll talk about him in just a second. So I am very curious to see where they're going to go with this particular storyline. I'd love to hear what you guys think about that because it's very apparent to me that all of this is going to get swept under the rug, right? It's never, word's never going to get out that Trent was arrested. They're going to keep it hush hush because King Dwendal is going to sweep it under the rug. We already know that this is going to happen because we saw it kind of at the end of this episode. But also, too, it had to happen regardless because Trent is wild and free throughout the entire campaign. What does this mean then for the Cobalt Soul and for Vestaragna in terms of investigating Trent? I don't know. I'll be curious to see where they go with that. Speaking of Vestaragna maybe being not a good person, let's talk about Lucien Tavel. In this episode, we meet a character named Cree Deeproots, who is a tabaxi, a blood domain cleric. I mistakenly said a blood hunter in the episode 6 reaction. I forgot she was a cleric. That was my bad. Thank you guys for correcting me. Cree Deeproots, who is a tabaxi cleric who travels with a group called the Tomb Takers. Very specifically, she traveled with Lucien Tavel, who is the original body of Molly Mock Tealeaf. Lucien Tavel is the originator, the host body, however you want to call it, who was killed by Vestaragna in the Savalier Woods because she was trying to take the Book of the Somnova. Lucien kind of grew up in like a semi-abusive family and eventually split ways from his family after his parents were killed. From what I remember, I've not read the book, the Nine Eyes of Lucien. I've not read the book, but I did read a brief summary of this when I was doing research for this. And eventually, at some point, he befriended Cree and then met the other Tomb Takers, which is Zoran, Otis, and Typhel. They all met up and became this traveling group. So the 5 of them, there was also, I think there was a 6th person who died as well, but I don't remember who that person was. They all worked together and they were hired by Vestaragna to go into Aor to retrieve any items or artifacts. While they were in there, one of their traveling companions was killed. But they walked out of there with this book. When Vess tried to take the book, claiming that it was part of the spoils of what she had hired them to do, they basically told her, no, no, no. We lost our friend for this fucking thing. We're keeping it. You can keep everything else. Lucian began reading it and found that it was a book. I think was it either written or possessed by the minds of the philosophers of the Cognosa ward of Aor. And they began speaking to him, and they ended up calling him the Nonagon, and they kept telling him that he was going to bring Aor back and going to, bring the Cognosa ward back. And it started to affect the way that he thought. The Tomb Takers ended up reaching back out to Vesteragna to oversee a ritual, which was maybe the ritual to become the Nonagon. I don't remember exactly what the ritual was. And they went out to the Savalier Wood, and Vess purposefully fucked up the ritual. And it didn't necessarily kill Lucian, but it did scatter his soul. They buried him, believing him to be dead. Vess took the book. She is currently the one in possession of the Book of the Somnovum. Sometime later, Mollymauk Tealeaf woke up in an empty grave, climbed his way out with not a memory in his head. All he could say was the word empty, which became MT, which became Mollymauk Tealeaf. That is how he got his name. I am so goddamn excited for the Lucian storyline. It's one of my favorite storylines. The Aor arc is one of my favorite arcs in the entirety of the Mighty Nein campaign. So I am very, very, very excited to see more hints about this. Obviously, when Molly dies, those hints are gonna dry up. But ooh boy, when Jester scries on Molly and finds him walking in the snow when he's in Aor, that's gonna be such a good season finale. Back with Cree. We see Cree here in the Evening Nip because she now works with the gentleman. I believe the Tomb Takers have split up at this point, and she is working kind of independently for the gentleman. She ends up taking their blood so that she can track them as they go on to do these tasks for the gentleman, which hurts them later down the line when they get to Aor, because that means the Tomb Takers are able to track them. And there's a whole debacle where they keep stealing a bag of holding from one another, and the Threshold crests, which they need to power the city of Aor. The Mighty Nein steals them from the Tomb Takers. The Tomb Takers steal them back. The Mighty Nein follow. The Tomb Takers give chase. It's a whole thing. And it is made impossible by the fact that Cree has their blood and can follow them at any point in time. Shockingly, not the biggest surprise in this episode, which was in fact Nidus Okiro. Okay, sure, Calamity lore in my Mighty Nein episode? Apparently it's more likely than you think. So, Nidus Okiro is Lou Wilson's character from Calamity, Exandria Unlimited Calamity, sometimes just called EXU, or sometimes mostly just called Calamity. Calamity was a 4-part miniseries DM'd by Brennan Lee Mulligan. Features Luis Carrazzo, Marisha, Sam, Travis, Abria Iyengar, and Lou Wilson. Those were the 6 players. And it told the story of a group known as the Ring of Brass, who were, for lack of a better term, responsible for the Calamity, which was the moment in time when the gods went to war. And it was real bad for Exandria. I think at one point, Brennan, when he's DMing, says that over a third of the world's population is killed during the Calamity, and most of that happens in the first day of the Calamity. Nidus was a sorcerer bard, more bard than sorcerer, but had a couple sorcery points. He was also the guild master of the Golden Scythe, which was like a financial mercantile institution that was run by like a dragon's horde that Nidus could summon. It's real funny. Him summoning the dragon and telling it to fuck off is hysterical to me. He also had a draconic heritage as well as being a draconic origin sorcerer. So he was called the Dragon of Avalier, and when he died, he was called the Last Dragon of Avalier as well. He was a former pirate who later founded a school for sorcerers, and he died on the floating city of Avalier. So there were 2 major floating cities that we know about, really. There were others. They were called magocracies, which means they were societies run by mages. There was Avalier, which is where this story takes place, and then there's also Aor, which is where EXU Divergence takes place, which is really, really fun. I'm going to talk about Divergence a little bit later on. But EXU Calamity takes place on the floating city of Avalier. Nidus would eventually die on Avalier in the final episode as it crashed into the continent of Dominus, which, because Dominus is hit by Avalier, it scatters into what becomes the Shattered Teeth, which is a series of islands, I think in the south somewhere. I don't remember. Nidus's final moments alive in Calamity are him getting a sending from his brother, asking him if he made it out okay, how he is, and Nidus telling him all will be well while knowing that he is actively about to die, but also realizing that his brother and his students at his school would survive the immolation of Avalier due to the actions that him and the brass ring took. Very, very, very sad stuff. I bawl my eyes out at Calamity, and oh my god, it's going to be so fun. Because here's your announcement, guys. Meg and I are doing Calamity, and not only that, we're going to move some stuff around so we can do it in January. I left a note in episode 6. I think it's in the comments of episode 6. I think I pinned it, saying that we were going to hopefully get to it by March. I'm thinking we might get to it a lot sooner, guys. We'll see. Meg and I have a show picked out already for January that's going to come out the first couple weeks of January. We are expecting Vox Machina to come out towards the end of January, though as of right now, today is December 14th. We still have not received a trailer for Vox Machina. It could be way later. We were planning on having to record Vox Machina in late January, early February. So if that doesn't happen, we could have Calamity out as early as February. So we'll see. But Meg and I had another show that we were going to do that we are instead going to push back until after Vox Machina, and we'll do that then instead. It'll be Meg's first time watching, though. It's going to be really, really exciting. And I'm telling you this now. I will be crying for like the last hour of Calamity. I cannot watch Sarah's final moments without bawling my fucking eyes out, dude. When he rolls the 30 to escape, and it's like Brennan says, the last member of the brass ring gets to keep his promise to his family. He needs to be put in jail, Brennan Lee Mulligan. He needs to go to jail. And I say that with all the love in the world because Brennan is absolutely incredible. But good lord, it hits me every fucking time. It doesn't matter how many times I've seen Calamity, I still cry. The Market of Wonders. If you see me dry heaving during the Market of Wonders, mind your business, okay? I'm tearing up thinking about it. Anyway, very excited. We're going to be doing Calamity in January. We're going to be recording it. I don't know when it's going to be out. I will not make any promises, especially because Meg is not here. I'm letting you guys know this now. We are recording on January 4th or 5th, so we'll be recording in about 2 weeks. I'm so excited. Anyway, hearing Nidus's name was absolutely shocking to me. I was not expecting it. When the gentleman said that he was sending them after some sort of pre-Calamity thing, I was like, oh, cool. It's going to be like, I thought maybe it would tie into Aor. I wasn't sure. And then he said, Nidus Okiro. And I was like, I had that moment of like, I know that name. Why do I know that name? And then I was like, holy shit, isn't that Lou's character? If you guys could have seen the fucking hamster on the wheel in my brain trying to rapidly put that together, it was crazy. I'm going to move on from this point now, but when I get to like the future topics, I am going to talk about Calamity a little bit more, so I'll come back to that in a bit. But let's move on to the Cloven Crystal. We heard Uk'otoa, the Leviathan demigod trapped under the Lucidian Ocean, who gave Ford his magic, guiding Ford throughout this episode, and it became apparent to me, probably too late, compared to everyone else. I was like, oh shit, there must be a Cloven Crystal here. And I said it in the episode, but I did not remember where the original Cloven Crystal was. Found out it's in the Labenda Swamp. Super cool. Thank you guys for letting me know. He found it actually through the gentleman, so it actually makes sense that they just kind of transported that into what it became here, which was they're on a mission for the gentleman, but it's not in the gentleman's storehouse. It's just, it happens to be where all of Nidus's shit was. I think that's a cool change. It would make sense why no one's really found it, because one, no one knows what to look for. It's in a big fucking lake full of gold and money. But two, it is a highly protected area that the Empire was guarding. So Uk'otoa, like I said, is a Leviathan demigod. He is currently trapped in the Lucidian Ocean. He was created by Zahir, who is the cloaked serpent, who was one of the betrayer gods. And when Zahir was banished during the Calamity, Uk'otoa was kind of left to rule the seas. He eventually was sealed away, and he began creating pacts with warlocks, Avantika and Vandrin very specifically, in order to become freed. There were 3 seals that they had to break, which are these cloven crystals. Vandrin eventually betrayed Uk'otoa, which led to Uk'otoa causing the storm that would later sink the Tide's Breath, which was Vandrin's ship, hopefully killing Vandrin. Although Vandrin is not dead, he escapes to the Isle of Bisaft, I think. He chooses a new warlock instead, which is Ford, of course. The first cloven crystal was found, like I said, in the gentleman's safe house in Labenda Swamp. Ford later absorbed it into his chest when he touched it. Like, Caleb is like trying to identify it. Ford's like, here, and it just kind of, he eats it. He's the Ball Eater, which is the name of their ship after they kill Avantika and steal her ship, the Squall Eater. The second cloven crystal was Vandrin's. Formerly, he sold it at a flea market, and Avantika killed the guy that bought it, so now it's hers. And then the third cloven crystal was also on Vandrin's ship, which of course sank when Uk'otoa, tried to kill him. Ford later finds it, and he leaves it in the Gravid Archipelago. At the end of the campaign, actually post-campaign, I should say, Uk'otoa is eventually unleashed and new cloven crystals are created. Ford ends up keeping one for himself. He gives one to the Cobalt Soul, and then he puts the other on the island of Rumblecusp, which they'll head to later in the story. Moving on to Essek and Virat. Essek did a very, very selfish thing by rescuing Virat from the front lines. He didn't really take him very far. He dimension doored him to like 500 feet away, I guess. I think that this, obviously this is going to lead to Virat's death. Like, Virat will die. It is not a question of if, it is a question of when. However, I have seen a lot of new theories popping up that Virat will either be experimented on by Essek, which I think is kind of grim. I don't know that Essek's in the right place mentally to do that. Or it could be, which I think is much more likely, is that Virat goes to steal the beacon back and is killed by either Astrid or Eadwulf, and becomes the dying Kreen soldier that the Mighty Nein meet. I do think that that is a heavy possibility that he could be that. Again, I think Virat will die regardless. It doesn't necessarily matter. But I do think it would be interesting if he is the one that gives the beacon to the Mighty Nein and inadvertently saves the dynasty by doing so. I also had an inkling early in the show that Essek's mother would pass at some point. Her sickness seems to be increasing, but to me it made sense that Essek's mother, Dirta, would die as well, because I think the loss of his friend and the loss of his mother would push Essek over the edge of like, we need to study this as much as we can. Like, it can't all be for nothing. I could see Essek having a breakdown about it, of losing his mother and losing his friend. But I also don't know that they've given any indication that Dirta is in danger, apart from the fact that we've seen her leave the homestead. Thankfully, Virat found her, but who knows? She could leave again anytime soon. And then my last note for this episode before we get into like the future plot points and stuff is that we met up with Yasha in Zadash. She's going to meet up with the Mighty Nein in the next episode. And I originally said that she'd meet them in the bathhouse just because I do think that would be very funny. But Yasha seems so single-mindedly focused on what she's doing. I don't know that that would necessarily make sense for her to meet them in the bathhouse. So I'm not 100% sure. But let's move on then into the future of the Mighty Nein. So here's where I see things going. I think for sure they're going to get the beacon by the end of the season, likely in episode 8, from a dying soldier in the tunnels under Zadash, which I think theoretically could be Virat. There are people that I've seen saying that they think that Essek and Virat will go to steal the beacon back, but Essek theoretically could go in disguise. Someone left a comment saying that they thought that perhaps Essek was the soldier that gives the Mighty Nein the beacon. I think that's a little too convoluted for me. I don't know that I could see that happening. Maybe it can. I don't know. I don't know everything, but I think that would be interesting. I think the high likeliness is more Virat goes. Maybe he takes some soldiers with him or something, and he goes. Like, I think what will happen is Essek, in his moment of panic with Virat, will tell him, he told me he could save my mom. I did what I had to. This is where it is, but like, I have duties to uphold. I think he'll threaten Essek. I also think, though, that he'll say, like, if you tell me where it is, I won't tell anyone. Like, if we can get this home, no one needs to know. Whether or not it's a lie is up to you to determine, but I think something like that could happen, and Essek will tell him it's in Trent's Towers, it's in Rexentrum, it's in Zadash, wherever the hell it is. I think it's in Zadash, but let's say that he goes there. he either goes by himself or he takes people with him. I'm not sure. I think there's a fight for that beacon. I think he makes it away, but he is mortally wounded. And I think that he stumbles across the Mighty Nein, and the Mighty Nein take the beacon from him, have no idea what the fuck it is, or what to do with it. There's also, I should mention this as well, there has been some promotional material that I've seen either in the teasers or like the coming soons for the season. There is a shot, I think, that shows Trent facing against Caleb. We do know that the Mighty Nein runs into Trent and Ludinus at some point early on in the campaign. I think they also meet Vess in that scene as well. I think potentially there is a future fight involved with Trent, although I'm not necessarily sure what the extent of that fight is. Whether it's Astrid finally tells Trent and Eowulf that Bren is here in the city and they go to look for him, or if she goes to try and talk to him and she's followed. Not sure. I'll be curious to see how that goes. I've mentioned this a few times though. I think Caleb is going to get a new amulet from Pumat Sol. I think we'll see the invulnerable vagrant. He'll go inside and actually get the amulet, which will be very fun. I mentioned this earlier, but I do also think we're going to see the Traveler and or Artagan by the end of this season. I do think, like I said earlier, I do think it'll be a private moment. I don't think the Mighty Nein will see it, but it will be just enough to let the audience know, by the way, this guy's totally real. Don't worry about it. Jester's not crazy. I actually said this. I don't know that I ever mentioned this in an episode, but I have mentioned this to Meg a few times when we've talked about the Mighty Nein outside of recording. But I actually think that it would be really interesting to see a parallel of Essek and Trent, where Essek parallels him in the scene when Trent is bringing in the bodies, and Essek's like, we just killed this guy for nothing. I think if Essek is broken enough, whether that be through the death of Virat, through the death of his mother, whatever it may be, I think when he meets back up with Trent to continue experimenting on the beacon, I think he basically is like, all right, bring in the other. And I think he turns into that kind of cold Essek that we knew when we first met him. I would like to see that, and I think Trent giving like a very sinister smile as he realizes that Essek is changing and is turning into, you know, kind of has like a Volstrucker mentality at that point of he's just fully selfish and a little demented and deranged at that point. I do think that that would be really interesting. Regarding Molly's death, I am no longer convinced it's going to happen at the end of season 1. However, I have heard the theory that Yasha is the one that is going to kill Molly. I don't know how much faith I put into that theory, only that I don't think it would have any emotional payoff. If they had established Yasha and Molly as having a relationship prior, that would be different. Because I always said too, I told Meg this a few times, but like they could still always pull a thing where when Yasha shows up and meets the Mighty Nein, Molly could still recognize her and say, "Oh my God, Yasha, where have you been? I haven't seen you in so long." And keep that part of their story, which is that they did know each other, but Oban got to her before the debacle at the carnival. That could still happen. I don't know that it's very likely, but it is a possibility. Like, that is a potential story route that they could do. Because I just don't know. I think it is such a weird choice to completely erase the dynamic between Molly and Yasha, considering that it was so important to them. So that's the only reason I say that that's a possibility. I'm not 100% sure, but we'll carry on with it. As I was saying though, I don't know that Molly will die this season, but if he does die, it's going to be next season. It cannot be any further than that. Molly never makes it to the Dynasty. Molly never makes it to Dark Toe. Molly never makes it to Avantika. So where does that leave us then? I always thought, and I said this last time too, that I think killing Molly would have been the perfect button for the end of the season because it ends on such a cliffhanger of like, can they actually bring him back? And then the first episode of season 2 would have been the days after Molly dies, where they take him to Caduceus, to the Blooming Grove, to see if Caduceus is a powerful enough cleric to heal him, and Caduceus is not. Later, he resurrects him via fucking divine intervention, but that's a whole other story. There has been no mention of the Iron Shepherds or anything like that. I think if they were to do it now, it would be kind of clumsy because they'd only have 2 real episodes to flesh that out. I don't know that that's worth it. So there are theories going around that Yasha could kill Molly because we've seen Yasha as a big old killing machine or whatever. I don't know what I think is going to happen. I think Molly survives this season. I think he makes it to next season, and I think he's killed early. He might even be killed in episode 1. I don't know. Episode 2, who knows? Because it would make sense if he was killed at the midpoint, which will be episode 5 out of 8. So if Molly dies, then I won't be surprised. That's like a big narrative thing. Usually a bunch of crazy shit happens in episode 5. It's usually one of the best episodes of an entire show because it is the midpoint. I don't see Molly making it to the finale because I don't see them pushing off Caduceus until season 3. One of the reasons why I think Molly also has to die is because I think next season should be the Avantika stuff. They are bringing up the cloven crystals. They are talking about Uk'otoa, and Ford does not learn the name of his patron until he meets Avantika. Avantika is the one that tells him the name Uk'otoa for the first time. And it's not until they travel with Avantika for a while that they realize that she is necessarily not a good person and that Uk'otoa is a betrayer. So I actually think that season 2 could be the Avantika arc, leading all the way up to Dark Toe with bonus stuff from the Dynasty happening as well. There was, I don't want to say too heavy of a focus on Molly, but there was a heavy focus on Caleb in season 1. And I think season 2 theoretically could switch to Jester or Ford specifically, but could switch to Ford and Yasha, or Ford and Jester, or Ford and Bo. I don't know. I think that could happen. That's what they did with Vox Machina, where the first season dealt very heavily with Percy stuff, and then season 2 picked up more with Vax, things like that. So I could see them bouncing it in that way. And the Avantika stuff took a while. They met Avantika in like the mid 20s, and she didn't die until episode 33, 34, or something like that. Then all the stuff on Dark Toe happened. And I actually think they're going to rewrite the Dark Toe stuff a little bit to let them actually explore that, because that was one of their major regrets in the campaign, was that they didn't get to explore Dark Toe. They literally docked on Dark Toe for like a day and then were banished from it. It really do be the Mighty Nein, you know? I also think, too, Avantika would be a good villain in that she's unassuming at first. And I think it would set up a good dynamic for Ford and Jester as well, where you can tell that Jester cares for Ford. She has a crush on him. Cut to, here's this sexy, hot elf who has the same god as him. Jester getting jealous, all that stuff. And then it could just be an arc at sea. I think they could do it. I think they could stretch that to make that fit. But at some point during that season, Molly has to die. That's what I'm confused about, unless Molly is there through the Avantika stuff, which doesn't really make sense to me, but like, I'm not going to yuck anyone's yum. Theoretically, I guess he could be there. I think Caduceus is a lot more useful than Molly. That's just my thing. Caduceus is my favorite Taliesin character. Quite frankly, it's like the only Taliesin character that I really care for. I like Percy. I think Molly is fine. I don't like Ashton, but Caduceus is the only one that I genuinely like. Yeah, I love that character. I really, really, really like Caduceus. So I really would like to see him. But I am very, very much enjoying Molly in the show, which is quite dastardly, but regardless. I'm thinking that season 2 is the Avantika stuff and the Dark Toe stuff and Molly's death. I think Molly dies early. I think Molly dies maybe before episode 3, and then the rest of the season is all the stuff on Dark Toe with Caduceus, all the stuff with Avantika finding the other cloven crystal, eventually killing her, and then from there moving on and redocking, and then season 3 would be maybe more dynasty stuff. I don't know. I could also see season 2 ending, if they don't do the Dark Toe stuff, season 2 theoretically ending with Caleb presenting the beacon to the dynasty. They could move the Avantika stuff back. The Avantika stuff did not need to happen as early in the campaign as it did, especially considering they deal with her much later on when she is undead and comes back for the Cloven Crystal in episode 98. But regardless, I'm not sure. But I do think that whenever we get to the dynasty, which would be dealing with Yeza's capture, not finding out, learning about Not's real name, learning about Veth Bernardo, learning all of that stuff, I think when that does happen, that season almost certainly ends with Caleb presenting the beacon before the Bright Queen. There is no doubt in my mind that that's where that season ends, and it's going to suck because it's going to be such a massive cliffhanger for everyone who doesn't know how that scene goes. I also am curious about how they're going to tie in Yasha into traveling with the Mighty Nein, because one of the things about Yasha right now is that she's being mind controlled by Oban, which means that that charm has to be dispelled. So I'm very curious as to how that will happen. I don't know if she walks into an anti-magic field and it dispels it. I don't know if someone else dispels it for her. I don't know if she's hit with something and it knocks her out of it. I have no idea how it happens, but Yasha will have to break that concentration with Oban to begin traveling with the Mighty Nein. So I'll be very curious to see how they do that. And then my last point that I want to talk about, because I've been talking for an hour and 50 minutes. Jesus Christ, this video is going to be so goddamn long. My very last point that I want to talk about is that I am certain, 100% certain, there will be a Calamity miniseries or movie. A lot of people said they wanted an animated movie that was like 2 hours long, which I could see them doing, but I would much rather see a miniseries. I think they've had a lot of success with their series, especially on Amazon. And I think given the length of Calamity, I mean, Calamity's like 20 plus hours. I would hate to see it condensed into a 2-hour film. I would much rather see it expanded upon as like a 4 or 5 episode miniseries. But I think given the fact that we've seen Xerxes and we've seen Nidus now, I am almost 100% certain we will be seeing the rest of them. I think theoretically we could see Paisha or learn about Paisha through the Cobalt Soul, whether that is in Vox Machina season 4, which we know is the Cobalt Soul affair per their trailer, or just through, I mean, Bo could still fucking mention her. I doubt it because they did like one major Calamity reference per season. So we got Xerxes in season 3 of Vox, and then we got Nidus in season 1 of Mighty Nein, and I think we could theoretically get Paisha in season 4 of Vox as well. We could also get a hint at Crocus, who is the one who finds Paisha's orb, the Orb of Avalier, in the Divergence, EXU Divergence. It goes from Paisha, who sends it to Maya, who is Saret's, Travis's character, Saret's daughter, and eventually onto Crocus. I think also, too, they've done something really interesting where there are 4 people from Calamity that we haven't met. 3 of them are Sam, Travis, and Marisha's character. The 4th is Abria Iyengar's character, Laren. There is a reference to Laren in Campaign 3 when they are traveling through, I think it's through Malaismere. I think they are looking at Ludinus's notes in Malaismere, and he found the name Laren. Ludinus knows about Laren. Ludinus could mention Laren at any fucking point. Paisha, connection to the Cobalt Soul. Loquacious, I'm not sure where his reference would come in, but then again, I wasn't sure where Nidus's reference would come in, or Xerxes' reference either. But Saret was the only one that survived. And I do think there could be a reference to Saret of like, they meet a bunch of Aarakocras and are like, oh, how long have you guys lived here? And they're like, oh, we've lived here for forever because our ancestors survived the Calamity. Boom, Saret, you know, or Saret's family or something. I do think that like, I can see the threads of how they would weave those storylines in. So I think beyond a shadow of a doubt, we are getting Calamity animated, and I will bawl my eyes out. And it'll be so fun because Meg will have seen Calamity, so we'll get to watch it with the knowledge of having seen it. I think that's going to be really, really, really fun. Those are all my notes. This is a 2-hour video. Hopefully I was able to cut this down to something watchable. I'm going to sign off here because it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm quite tired. If you guys have any questions for me, leave them down below. If you want me to do this for episode 7 and 8, let me know because I might as well at this fucking point. I was going to do one at the end of the season anyway, but here I am, Boo Boo the Fool, having to do it after episode 6 because they fucking dropped Nidus lore in the middle of the Mighty Nein. But yeah, I'm going to sign off here for the night. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Hopefully these notes were comprehensive enough and that they made sense. I will probably see you guys in the next episode of the Mighty Nein, which by the time you guys are watching it might be coming out tonight, or maybe it came out yesterday. Not sure. Depends on when I get this video posted, but we'll see. But for now, thank you guys for hanging out with me. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!